Well, hello, hello, hello. Happy Monday, if you could call it that. Welcome. I see you all in the chat. If we haven't already met, hello. It's your boy Mix Mercury, the Astro Himbo. And this is your weekly transit chat. I have titled it We're in the Thick of It because we are in the thick of it. This is the big bang last month of 2024 astrology. And it sucks. I'm just kidding. It kind of sucks a little bit. I'm not going to lie to you, but we're going to get through it like we always do. So let me see who's here. Hi, Priya. Hi, Robin. Yes, yes. Hey, Sherry. Hello, Amissa. All right. And then hello to those who are not in the chat. I'm so glad that you are here. First thing I want to say is thank you if you were there. I already said thank you, but I'll say thank you again. If you hung out with me on Thanksgiving, I really enjoyed that. So thank you. Wait, from the screen to the ring to the pen to the king. Okay. Thanks. Hey, Jim. If you were there on Thanksgiving to get a mini reading from me, thank you for being there. I really enjoyed that mini session. I put a positive spin on everybody's placements, especially the ones that they have the most trouble with. And it seemed like it was really rewarding and special for the people who were there. So I enjoyed doing it. I think it's a great practice for me to also look at the good side of these transits and placements because I can get bogged down on the negative aspects and experiences of them sometimes. So I thought that was really nice. It made me feel a lot better about being alone for the holiday again. And if I need to host another one for Christmas, I will do that. So, period. Hey, Desiree. Welcome in. Welcome in. Oh. The next thing I'm going to host sometime in December. I haven't picked a date yet. Should be December, if not January, but I have to run some charts and figure out when the best time would be to do it. But I want to host a Sidereal Astrology 101 workshop for just like a low fee, just to talk about basically a lot of the things that you could find in your astrotherapy journal guidebook if you have one. Oh, it's dusty. Somebody has requested a little intro session just to figure out like what makes astrology different from tropical, or sidereal astrology different from tropical. So I haven't hosted a workshop in a long time, but I feel better about speaking in front of groups now. So I figure, why not? We should do that. I'll have some time at the end of December anyway. So why not hang out with you guys some more? So be on the lookout for that. I will post the link in my booking site where everything else is. And if you are curious or interested in getting a reading with me, I have a bunch of different services. You can go to mixmercury.as.me. It looks like this. And you can book a session with me there. So I need to run a sale. I haven't gotten around to doing it yet, but I need to run just a little bitty sale in honor of Black Friday and such. So be on the lookout for that as well. And if you haven't already, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, turn your notifications on so you can be the first to know whenever I go live every Monday around 12 p.m. Central, barring something else doesn't come up. So cool. All right. Now that that's out of the way, let's look at the sky for this week. I already know the main thing that I want to talk about is Venus in Capricorn. Venus just got there last night around midnight, and it is forming an opposition to Mars in Cancer for the rest of the month, while both Mercury and Jupiter are making their oppositions as well. So this is interesting because Venus is responsible for Jupiter, so they're on a team with a trine in Earth signs, and then Mars is responsible for Mercury. Both of them are in water signs. So we have this like dual earth water show off thing happening. And I have lots of thoughts about it. But let me just double check because I know yesterday we also had the new moon in Scorpio. That was at about 15 degrees. This week we have our second Mercury Jupiter opposition that will be on Wednesday. We also have the Sun square Saturn on Wednesday, which is the Sun at 18 degrees Scorpio square Saturn at 18 degrees Aquarius. Mind you, 18 degrees is also where Saturn stationed retrograde. It's still hanging out there while it's gearing up to move forward again. So that's happening. We have the Sun conjunct Mercury retrograde on Thursday, and this is also known as the Mercury Cazimi, where Mercury moves back into the baleful rays of the Sun and technically goes combust. It's a whole thing. Maybe I'll talk about it today. Maybe I'll talk about it another day. But this point of the Mercury retrograde cycle is important because this is usually where people actually like realize they comes to your conscious awareness what Mercury retrograde has actually been doing this whole time, or you have some kind of lights on aha moment where everything kind of clicks and makes sense. Typically, that makes the actual retrograde transit get a little bit less harsh, but that's not always the case. So I don't want to promise that, but something to be aware of for this Thursday. And then Friday, big day, we have Mars officially stationary retrograde, meaning that bitch is going to start moving backwards, appearing to move backwards in the nighttime sky. In Cancer, that's the moment we've been waiting for a few months now. And that is at 11 degrees Cancer. So keep that in mind this Friday. We will also have Mercury retrograde square Saturn too, again at that 18 degrees of Scorpio and Aquarius. Goodness gracious. And on Saturday, we'll have the Sun opposite Jupiter retrograde too, which I think is going to say something about what these Mercury Jupiter oppositions have been as well. Remember, the Sun shines a light, brings consciousness, brings things into focus for us. So anytime the Sun is making aspects, something about our conscious awareness is tied into that. What we're seeing, what we're perceiving, what experience we're having, and that we're consciously aware of. And then yeah, that's pretty much everything for the week. So there's a lot of astrology this week. I'm not going to go through every single placement just for the sake of time. So what I'm going to do instead is talk through some thoughts that I'm having about kind of all of these things together, maybe what this tension actually is, what it feels like to us in real time's terms, and then try to tie back in what the astrology of it all is. So, just to list off to hear myself talk what I need to discuss today so I don't forget. One of them is this whole maid assisted suicide conversation that's going on Twitter. Another one is a clip that I heard from the recent pod. What is going on? From this recent Pod Save America episode that had one of my favorite leftists on it, Hassan Piker. There's a clip he mentioned there that I think was relevant to the new moon. There's also a podcast I listened to this morning where the most of my ideas were coming from Around the Way Curls. This is one of my favorite podcasts to listen to, and they were talking about. Now I gotta find it. I believe the community title is like "Community is All We Have" or something like that. Let me double check. It is episode 391, Beloved Community, We All We Got. If I can remember, I will tag that in the notes. But if you can go and listen to this episode, I'm gonna type it in the chat. Episode 391, Beloved Community, We All We Got. If you can make some time to listen to this episode after you listen to me run my mouth today, I think this is like a great conversation about what I think this Venus-Mars opposition is doing, along with the Venus-Mars opposition along with the Jupiter-Mercury opposition at the same time. I also just think it's a good conversation to have, even if it wasn't astrologically relevant. But as you know, media tends to follow the same timeline as the sky does anyway. So I want to talk about that too. Okay, so let's start with Venus in Cancer. Excuse me, Venus in Capricorn. Venus is in Capricorn. Oh yeah, the other thing I wanted to talk about was Harmony Phoenix's live that they did last night. That also ties into all of this. Okay, I have my verbal notes out. So Venus in Capricorn. Capricorn as well as Cancer, where Mars is. These are cardinal signs. Cardinal signs are about starting shit. They're also about regulating your body, your nervous system, and getting your needs met. Oftentimes with cardinal signs, the struggle of getting needs met is both social, it is material, it's emotional, it's systemic, it involves power dynamics, it involves ways that we have to engage in relationship in order to get our needs met, and prioritizing needs based on whatever the circumstances are that we're in, the material circumstances that we're in. So when it comes to cardinal signs, one big theme that comes up is neglect. It's basically just not getting what you need, either because someone doesn't have it or they don't want to give it to you, or there's a bunch of stuff wrapped up in that dynamic. And then there's also the side of um, control, control and regulation. And so, what I usually say for cardinal signs is that a lot of times cardinal signs are trying to help us regulate on the inside by controlling or changing or manipulating something outside of us to make us feel better. Sometimes this is a great thing. This is what we need to do. We do actually need to change the environment to make us feel better. And then other times we need to change what's going on the inside of us. We need to find ways to self regulate so that the environment can also changed or something like that. But basically, a lot of times, depending on which sign, which element you're dealing with your external circumstances somehow, circumstances and relationships somehow, and trying to figure out where your power is, what you have control over, and how to move forward, what needs to change. Is it me or is it the environment? Cool. Capricorn is the sign that is least likely to change itself and more like, well, Capricorn, let me rephrase. Capricorn is the most likely, I would say, to change something about itself in order to conform to the environment around it. And this can mean going without, like just simply accepting that you don't have what you need and therefore you don't need to try and get it because you can't get it. Speaking as a Capricorn sun and Mercury, it'd be like that sometimes. Sometimes whatever the situation is so much bigger than you and so far out of your control that it just is what it is. And so you got to figure out how to orient yourself around the circumstance or the situation or the environment in order to survive. Venus in Capricorn then speaks to how we navigate our relationships whenever our relationships or the people we're in relationship with won't change. At least that's the theory that I'm going with for today. I think there's also something to be said for the ways that we withhold from ourselves in order to maintain relationships, or how we give to others in ways that doesn't necessarily center or prioritize what we need. And again, these are not necessarily always good things or bad things. It just depends on the situation. Um, so I posted a TikTok on all my social medias kind of joking about this because I thought it was funny that it was Taurus asking Capricorn the question of like, Taurus or Capricorn, what's going on? Like, you seem upset. And Capricorn is like, man, I just need to be held. I don't even care if it's at gunpoint for real, for real. Like, Capricorn will oftentimes settle for crumbs if it means they get just a little bit of what it is that they need. So I thought that was interesting, being that Capricorn, Venus in Capricorn, is responsible for Jupiter in Taurus currently. Okay, so how do I want to build this out? The dynamic between Cancer and Capricorn is a little something like this. And I want you to think about consumerism in this example. I could see Cancer being more like, well, okay, context is like the economy, right? The economy going to hell very, very soon. Like some depression, Great Recession point 3.0 vibes coming up in the coming season, right? Cancer's approach would be, well, I have money now, so let me spend it, let me enjoy myself, let me indulge a little bit here and there before the time comes where I can't indulge anymore. That would maybe be Cancer's outlook. Capricorn's outlook is, oh shit, there's going to be a time where we're not going to have enough money and resources. I better start saving now. I better start depriving myself of the things I need now so that I have resources later for these other potential unforeseen circumstances that are going to arise because we'll be in a recession. There's not necessarily like a good or a bad, because the reality is, at the end of the day, any of us could walk outside and die at any moment, which is very Capricorn, very Saturn, right? But then there's also like the reality that like sometimes you do need to have some kind of a safety net in place or a safety blanket in place, a nest egg, whatever you want to call it, emergency fund, so that when an emergency arises, you have resources set aside for that emergency. So, you know, there's always a debate, I feel like, between these two signs of pleasure now or pleasure later, or pleasure now, like indulgence, denial, just back and forth. With Mars, not winter make me tear up. I'm sorry. Um, with Mars being in Cancer, I think we've talked about this idea of taking action to actually like self-soothe, to give yourself something that you need or something that feels good so that you can feel better now, and kind of using your distress as a motivator to take action. So there's that piece going on. I think there's also an aspect of that placement, or that transit rather, that can be a little bit individualistic of I need to feel better, and so I need to do what I need to do to make me feel better, and not necessarily considering everybody else. Hey Elizabeth, good to see you. Um so there's a little bit of that going on with Mars in Cancer, as well as, well, no, we'll just say, because Mars is usually about being separate from the group, there is this attitude of like, well, I need to do something to make me feel better because nobody else is going to do it, right? So there's that on that side. And then on the Venus side, with Venus in Cancer now, like I said, there's something about this placement that says, like, in order for me to maintain connection, acceptance, and approval, my relationships, whatever it is, I need to be very resourceful, very pragmatic. I need to, for whatever reason, deny or withhold myself of something because this relationship is the priority. Okay, so I think that's interesting. Interesting, an interesting opposition. And then you zoom out a little bit more to, again, the planets that both of these planets, Mars and Venus, are responsible for, being Mercury and Jupiter. Now, we talked last week a little bit how Jupiter in Taurus is this idea of like, what is the culture? What are the cultural norms? What are the values and shared threats, shared goals, shared vision that we have for the world, right? Or for our relationships or whatever it is, and using those belief systems or those values as a way to maintain relationships. Or rather, well, yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. So with Jupiter being in a trine with Venus, and something that they talked about a lot in the podcast that I referenced earlier was like, part of how you build trust in relationships and trust in community is through having this shared values system, shared vision, shared I don't know, shared goal that you're all working towards together. And that's a way of like creating, like I said, trust, but also a way of creating a sense of security and a sense of being able to depend on one another, which Venus is also responsible for, is either depending on other people or people are depending on them. So it's really important to see how our collective belief system, our collective values, or even just the values between you and people that you're close to, are influencing how you decide to be resourceful within your relationships, how you are prioritizing needs in your relationships, how you are delegating responsibilities or resources within your relationships, stuff like that. And if you don't have a shared purpose or shared value or shared vision for the future, then it can get kind of complicated. There can be a lot of conflict in trying to prioritize, whatever it is that you're trying to prioritize. Now, on the other side, like I said, we have Mars in Cancer with Mercury in Scorpio. And Mars is a little bit more self-protective, a little bit more defensive, a little bit more individualistic, and will do what it needs to do to survive and protect itself. Because sometimes the group is a threat to me, basically. And I think that's like the heart of a lot of these oppositions in both senses, is that, I want to belong, I want to be in relationship, I want to be comfortable in community, but I don't feel safe here. I don't feel comfortable here. This doesn't feel good to me. And so it's a bigger risk for me to put myself in a position where I'm dependent on you because one, I don't know if you're going to show up. And two, I don't know if you're going to cause me more harm by me being in relationship with you. So therein lies the tension, basically. Like, do I make myself vulnerable to the people I'm trying to be in relationship with by sharing what I need and allowing them to show up for me? Or does that actually put me in harm's way even more because we don't have maybe a shared vision or a shared set of values or whatever it is to get along? And the only placements that are breaking up this dynamic are the sun. The sun's not really breaking it up because the sun is still in Scorpio. The moon, where the moon is moving around all the time, who's also responsible for Mars. So keep that in mind. And then Saturn, who is in Aquarius. I think Saturn in Aquarius is really like the canary in the coal mine to some extent in the background because this is like the easiest planet to ignore. And I mean that very literally. Saturn being the planet of ignorance and disregard, but also Saturn being the planet of like, hey, this is the reality, whether you want to pay attention to it or not. So whenever we're talking about a shared vision or a shared goal, we're thinking future, something that's happening in the future. And with Saturn and Aquarius, it's very easy to get, I think, caught up in ideals or caught up in theories, caught up in I don't know, like literature that's been written about what we need to do. And there's difficulty of actually like making that happen because you kind of don't know what it looks like. So a question that they posed in this podcast that I thought was interesting was like, really asking the question and getting clear on what is our goal as a community or as people on the left or people as, whatever identity group that you fit in. Like, what is your goal? And rather than just like pontificating on what the goal is, I think Venus in Capricorn is saying, like, okay, cool. We know what the goal is. Now, Venus in Capricorn is like the project manager who basically like tells everybody kind of what their role is, what they need to do, how they need to move forward so that we can make this idea of the future into a reality. This is the pragmatism aspect of both Capricorn and Taurus and Earth that is being offered to us right now because it sounds great, this idea of liberation, but what does that really mean? What are the actionable steps that we can take towards that goal within the constraints that we exist in currently? The constraints being capitalism and a fully alt-right government. um, so yeah, does that kind of make sense? It's like the struggle is well, I will say for myself, something I was thinking about was how I personally have the tendency to want to make like in this particular dynamic Capricorn and Taurus be like the bad guys because because talking about Capricorn especially, you usually have to confront some shit that is uncomfortable to confront, like death, like poverty, like scarcity, and just not having enough in general. And those are all a bunch of things that don't feel good. And that can also mean that we have to like occupy this position that we are not really given what we deserve or what we're entitled to. We're just in a situation where we don't got it. And so I don't know. I guess the downside of that placement is that, or not that placement, but that transit, being that it is responsible for Venus and or not Venus and Taurus, for Jupiter and Taurus is like kind of the idea of the quote American dream and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps thing. Like this is something else they talked about in the podcast that I thought was a really good point where the American dream is this idea that the American dream that is propagandized to us is something around the idea of like, if you can get it out the mud by yourself, if you can figure out how to make some shit shake, if you can come from nothing, start it from the bottom, now we here type vibes, then something about you is like more virtuous and more, I don't know, something you're just, it's like there's this moralizing around being able to become a successful millionaire or whatever, like from poverty, which is not realistic for most people. Like there are some situations, few and far between, I guess, where people have done it, but for the most part, a lot of people are at a starting disadvantage and therefore really can't just get it out the mud, so to speak. Not without sacrificing some aspect of themselves, their relationships, their I don't know, their health, their sanity, their well-being, like whatever it is, you really have to give up a lot in order to achieve the societal expectation of success. Yes, exactly. You're more worthy if you pull yourself up. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. um you're more worthy if you can come from nothing and be successful, and then you like start to get this attitude that because you did it everybody else should be able to do it because this is America, land of the free, and because of our freedoms we're able to do blah 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 blah, blah. Exploit other people for their labor, right? Could go on and on. So there's that aspect of that dynamic that I think a lot of us have fallen into, where we feel like we're in this constant scarcity mindset where you have to be, and this again showing how opposites aren't really opposite. We get into this mindset where it's like, okay, if I'm going to pull myself up, I can't focus on anything or anybody else that I care about. I just have to focus on me and get myself out of this uncomfortable situation. So then we're back over here on the Mars and Cancer side where it's like, cool, I'm going to be driven and determined to have enough money to buy all of my toys and the things that feel good because that's what I care about. That's what I value. And I don't really care who I hurt along the way. So that's one way of looking at that dynamic. There's also um, the other part of this where whenever the values change, right? If we shift out of American dream thinking and we shift into maybe more communist ways of thinking or more socialist ways of thinking or just more communal ways of thinking in general on this topic of like, what is liberation for us? What does it then look like to shift our priorities into caring about the people we're in relationship, whether that is our family members or our friends or our chosen family, our coworkers, like whoever it is? um, like we kind of talked about last week, reframing our idea and perception of what community is, and then use Venus and Capricorn to say, okay, this is how I'm going to do that. It's kind of like really getting clear on the areas of your life where maybe you aren't paying enough attention, where you aren't giving enough of your time and energy to, because the priority is, making money. I know I'm definitely guilty of this, and this is not just Capricorn stereotype, but kind of is, right? Um, I'll speak for myself, right? Using myself as an example. I just spent the last few weeks, I don't know how long, of really focusing on either working or resting. And a lot of times both of those things, even though the nature of my work is very social and very engaged, publicly engaged, it's like I haven't got to see my parents or my dog very often. And then, there's more layers to that. But I had my dog with me for a few days last week over Thanksgiving. And while she was with me, it's like, okay, immediately, like my entire routine and daily life shifts because now I have to orient myself around her. Again, back to this idea of Venus and Capricorn having to orient itself around other people or the environment and conform to it. I have to conform to her whenever she's here. And there's a part of me that can be resentful of that because it means I can't do what I want to do. I couldn't go for my 3-4 hour long bike ride out of the city because it was going to take 5 hours and she was going to be here sitting by herself, and she's the only dog now. She used to have a sister to spend time with during the day and she doesn't anymore. But she also doesn't get to spend time with me anymore. So if I have the opportunity to just be with her, then I should just be with her. So that's what I decided. And then the other benefit of that was by staying home to take care and be with her, I got to rest, which is something I also don't get to do very often. So, when you shift the value to being more relational, you do have to kind of change and maybe do things that you don't want to do, but that are still valuable and still worthy of your time. Um, just checking this comment. This is so wild because I've really been confronted in the last few days with how much my kids need me right now versus how much I give to strangers on the internet. Ooh, I feel that so bad. I give so much to strangers on the internet, so much more to strangers on the internet. But in your defense and also mine, I'm sure part of that is also because strangers on the internet also give a lot back to us, which kind of speaks to the transactional nature of earth signs in general, but also Venus and earth signs, right? There is like a give and a take aspect of being in relationship and having needs that I think we like to, for whatever reason, think about community and giving and receiving as this like seamless process of like everybody has what they need because there's always someone around who can supply it. And honestly, that's not realistic, right? Um, there is a type of emotional support that I cannot get from my parents. And the more that I keep trying to change them to get that from them, the more distance I create in our relationship. Whereas if I accept the fact that they cannot give me this particular thing that I need and I seek that out somewhere else, that allows me to then see them for what I can get from them in the ways that like our relationship exists. So it's not to say that, and what I can give also, it goes both ways. So there's something to be said just about like, again, being very pragmatic and practical about what you can provide and also what you are receiving from whoever it is that you're engaging with or who you're considering in this dynamic, right? I see y'all are feeling it. So, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, it's uncomfortable. Talking about Capricorn is uncomfortable because sometimes you are having to confront either the ways that you are not able to give enough or, do enough or whatever it is, that enoughness thing comes up. And then there's the temptation from all the fixed signs in the sky to shame yourself for that. And it's like, maybe don't go into the shame spiral. Feel the shame, let it pass through, let it, move you or drive you, speaking about Mars and Cancer again, but don't let it consume you to the point of doing nothing or to the point of continuing habits that are bad for you, that aren't actually helping you do what it is that you need to do. Hey Kratos, good to see you. But it is just being realistic about time, energy, resources, and other people's time, energy, and resources, and finding a way to get all of these things to work together systemically or systematically. One of those words. I forget what's the word. And that's why I talk about Venus and Capricorn as like the project manager, because that's at least what I assume a project manager does. I know that's what a manager does, having been in lots of Okay, twinks or bears. Listen, this is not what we're talking about today. Maybe another time. All right. Twinks or bears is funny. I got thrown off. Oh yes, project manager. Capricorn in general, but especially Venus and Capricorn being the project manager, like delegating tasks, taking stock of who can do what is everybody's role in the dynamic or in the ecosystem or whatever it is, and then everybody do that job because you are part of this larger team. Yes, sometimes that means you can't do this thing over here that you want to do, but you're doing this thing that is one in alignment with your values, hopefully, and in alignment with the values and the goals of the group. Teamwork makes the dream work. Which leads me to my next point, which is something that HP was talking about yesterday that dragged me all the way to hell and back. So thank you for that. I don't know if you're here, but I'm sure you will watch this later. Now, Instagram was kicking me in and out of the live, but they were talking a lot about something around this new moon and this idea of like, if you are being, also in my own words, I'll say if you're being soberly minded about the people and the situations that you're dealing with, or if you are like so optimistic to the point of being kind of delusional, like detached from reality. And the more that you kind of see situations for what they are, instead of trying to make them into what you believe them to be or what you want them to be, then sometimes that requires you to have to do things that you don't want to do. And they said, the one thing that really struck me was that being adult means sometimes you got to do some shit that you don't want to do or that you shouldn't have to do, especially whenever you're dealing with oppressive systems. Like, yeah, sometimes it's really fucked up that you still have to go to work and pay rent, even though bad things are happening on a regular basis all the time. But the reality is we still have to do that along with all of these other things that we are working towards in the distant future, or maybe the near future, who knows? And that's uncomfortable. That sucks. It's annoying. I'm definitely guilty of that. Like, But again, it kind of speaks to the sacrifice of trying to make just the sacrifice of like sometimes you just got to do what you got to do, and sometimes it's in your best interest to do that, but it's also uncomfortable. Um because the truth is uncomfortable or because reality is uncomfortable. And a lot of times I think we just don't want to confront that. Same thing with the masking conversation that never ends and all of the debates going on back and forth about that. And then I guess that leads us to the maid conversation as well, where people are debating people are debating the ethics, the morality of assisted suicide, especially for like disabled or terminally ill people. And disability justice has been such a big conversation of Saturn in Aquarius, I think because it is something that a lot of people are uncomfortable facing or thinking about, not just like within themselves, but also witnessing other people go through it. Um, and it blows my mind every single time how the conversation, especially this year, always devolves into like, well, if y'all would just be nicer about it, maybe people would listen. Like the respectability aspect of it keeps popping up. And I think that's really fucked up, but I think it's really interesting. And I was thinking about this earlier, like, why does it always keep turning into like, why does it keep turning into this thing where nobody wants to listen to disabled people? Nobody wants to listen to the people who are actually being harmed by a lot of these conversations and a lot of these debates. And I realized how much of it is like, I don't think we like to reckon with the ways that we contribute to the deaths of other people. I know that sounds like obvious, but when you really sit and think about that, like for example, closest thing that I could think about was like my dog, because I felt a lot of guilt, personal guilt, even though my other dog didn't live with me full time. She lived with my parents, but I felt a lot of guilt about the fact that she was carrying around this 8-pound tumor in her spleen for I don't know how many months, and we just didn't know. And like, did we not know? Like, we didn't know because we made a lot of assumptions about what her behavior was instead of just going and getting her checked out at the vet. And there being larger reasons for that, of course, like it's expensive when you don't have pet health care, right? Um to care for your dog whenever they're going through really big health crises, and then it ended up being like a terminal illness. So it was like, yeah, we did ended up having to euthanize her, but I felt so bad all the time because it was like, yeah, some of that is our responsibility. Like, even though she's a dog and she can't talk, like we were supposed to be attuned enough to her to notice when she was acting funny and when she might not be feeling good instead of just brushing it off onto it being something else. And so the end result was that she died. And that fucking sucks. That fucking sucks to like have to deal with the accountability of that, right? And I'm talking about my pet, right? I'm not trying to compare disabled humans to pets, but I'm just using that as an example of like an experience that I dealt with that I didn't want to fucking deal with. I mean, I could even talk about my grandpa several years ago who spent, I don't know, it might have been at least a week on different forms of like end of life. I don't know what you would call it. He spent time in the ICU for about a week and a half because his doctors gave him a medication that gave him this syndrome that just exponentially made all of his symptoms worse. So, are we going to sit here and say the doctors weren't responsible for that? No. Sometimes we contribute to other people's death, is my point. And I think like there are so many different ways. I'll reframe it. I'll say there are ways that we neglect each other, because that's really the point of cardinal signs, and again Venus and Capricorn. There are ways that we neglect each other, that we keep each other from getting what we need, or that we don't help each other whenever we're in need, or whatever it is, because we're uncomfortable with, I don't know, seeing other people be in distress or something. I don't know what I'm trying to say exactly, but I think I think whenever it comes to May, basically a lot of the arguments that I'm seeing is that people are like, yes. Yes. That's also why people's go-to is to dehumanize disabled people. If they don't see us as fully human, it helps ease their guilt about aiding in our deaths. Exactly. Thank you. I got lost in my words, but that's exactly what I mean. And so whenever it comes to MAID, a lot of the arguments that non-disabled people are making is like, well, no one's taking into consideration like the family having to either expend all of these resources or expend all of this time and how much, whatever, like they have to watch their loved ones suffer before they die. And so there should be a way to like help preserve their dignity so they can go out, without it having to be like the worst ever. And, I'm of the belief, disabled or not, that if somebody is suffering bad enough and there's no way to help them, do I want to say that? I don't want to say that. I think people should be able to choose bodily autonomy. At the end of the day, your body, your choice for the most part, right? But to make it a legal thing systemically to euthanize people can very easily become eugenics easily, because you're already taking a vulnerable population and putting their lives basically in the hands of the state. Same reason that people like to say that they don't want to put like um organ donor on their driver's license, because they think that the paramedics aren't going to help them if they're in some kind of an accident. They're just going to let them die and harvest their organs. Like, these are the same people who are like, no, but I think MAID's a good idea because people shouldn't have to suffer because blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, well, if the value here is that people shouldn't have to suffer, then why are we not advocating for better healthcare? Why are we not advocating for better end of life care? Why are we not advocating for just better circumstances so people don't have to suffer in their last days? Why are we not advocating to help people be more comfortable rather than just taking them the fuck out? Because if you actually ask disabled people, a lot of times they will say, I don't want to die. The fuck? I want to live. I want to be comfortable. Like someone said it perfectly. I don't want to die. I want to live without suffering. And I think all of us can agree to that. No, because a lot of times what we fear isn't really death. What we fear is suffering. So this idea of prolonged suffering is terrifying. And I guess this does fit right back into the conversation of Cancer and Capricorn. Like, the immediate release of death, you know, is one thing. And then the drawn out, very gory, very uncomfortable version of death is another thing. And to basically prioritize the people who are not actually experiencing the death, to prioritize their feelings versus the people who are actually dying, to me is nonsense. Like, why are we not prioritizing the perspective of the actual people who would be affected by this type of legislation? It's ridiculous. Like, it's ridiculous to me. Maybe you disagree. I don't know. But the point comes back to this, that it's easier to dehumanize disabled people, just like it's easier to dehumanize people overseas in Palestine or in Lebanon or in Sudan or, wherever it is. It's easier to kind of put people out of your mind as if they don't exist, so that you don't have to deal with the guilt or the ways that you contribute to their suffering, right? Um, and so I say all of that to say that shame concept comes back up because it is really uncomfortable. And it's like, instead of actually, again, learning how to deal with the shame or the guilt around these things, people decide that you shouldn't talk about it, that it's impolite, that it's rude, that it's too complicated. And everybody needs to like sit down and everybody needs to be cool. And we need to just talk about this in a way that doesn't rile everybody up. And it's like, why are we not being more riled up about death? It's death. The fuck? Like, what are we talking about? It's death. Once you die, that's it. We should absolutely be taking that more seriously and screaming from the rooftops about it, especially whenever we have an extremely violent government and military, the most lethal military in the world. Like, hello, we're dealing with some of the most violent people we've ever known, but people don't want to talk about that because it's uncomfortable, because it's scary, because it's doom and gloom, this and that. People don't want to talk about the pandemic because it's scary, because it's doom and gloom, because it's out of our control, because it's the government, because it's this, because it's that. All of these things, instead of us actually saying, okay, how am I contributing to this problem and how can I contribute less? How can I contribute less to other people's suffering? What can I do to ease other people's suffering? What can I do to help my neighbor? my fellow American or whoever the fuck. Like, what are some ways that maybe I can give up some of my comforts or my privileges or whatever you want to call it and be of service to someone else who maybe has less than me or who doesn't have it as easy as me or who is in a more compromised situation than I am. It's like ugh, ugh. Yes, there's so much sanitization and properness around death conversations. Exactly. And part of the reason, I don't even know if I want to talk about this on here, but part of the reason is because one of the accounts involved in this discourse on Twitter is someone who's also found themselves in this particular discourse on Twitter previous time and brings, the death of her husband into the conversation as like basically a reason to be able to speak over everybody else whenever it's like, look, we can't care more about one person's discomfort over talking about something that happened to someone who was actually in the compromised situation. Like, we can't care about her feelings more than we care about the reality of what these laws would mean for millions of people. Like, your feelings will pass. And I know that sounds harsh, but they will. That's the whole point of the opposition of Cancer and Capricorn. The feelings are temporary. They will pass. The discomfort is temporary. It will pass, unless you're actually dealing with chronic suffering of some kind, but the feelings cannot override the reality, the material circumstances, the material the material urgency of the moment. Basically, we have to do something rather than just like pretend it doesn't exist and wait for the right moment to talk about it in proper civilized ways whenever people are dying now. I don't know. And even me, I'm like, as I'm trying to talk about it, I'm tiptoeing because I don't want to say the wrong thing, but sometimes it just be like that. Sometimes it just fucking sucks that there are consequences to our actions and that in order for things to change, we have to change our actions. We have to change our behaviors. And we need to be moving in a way that's in alignment with what we actually believe about ourselves and of the world. And some people are doing that, and it's causing a lot of harm. And that's the other shitty part about it. And those are the people that we're having to conform to, right? We have to work 10 times as hard to protect ourselves from COVID because nobody else wants to protect themselves from COVID. And everybody would like to downplay the virus and not really talk about it because it's not 2020 anymore. And not even realizing that the only reason that they believe that is because right-wing propaganda has infiltrated so much of the media at this point. And that, what we like to see as, I don't know, what am I trying to say? What we like to see as like only those people over there are doing the really horrible bad things, not me. It's like, no, sometimes you too. Even with all of your good intentions and with all of your theory and all of your knowledge and this and that, like sometimes you too are also causing harm in ways that you might not be aware of because you don't want to acknowledge the ways that you're causing harm or because you don't want to listen to the people who are saying ouch. So I don't know. Because it's like for me, when I was living with my parents through the first two really dangerous years of the pandemic, I was very, very serious about, I was only like, what, 25, 26, 27 through those years. Um, and I had plenty of friends and plenty of people who, didn't live with their parents or whatever, who could just go out and do whatever they wanted to do because they were the only people that they had to worry about if they got sick. But for me, I stood by no matter what. I was like, I can't just take risks like that. And I wouldn't be okay with coming home and then accidentally infecting my parents because what if something did happen to one of them because of something that I did? That would be some of my responsibility. Like, yes, there is the larger government conversation around like systemic issues and systemic messaging and all that kind of stuff. But if I have the knowledge that if I go out and get infected with COVID and bring it back and it potentially kills one of my parents, that's on me because I made the decision. I took the risk. I have to be accountable for that. And a lot of people don't want to think about that because they don't want to carry the weight of like, oh my God, this is my fault. I did this. It's like, yeah. Again, shame exists for a reason. Shame exists to keep you accountable to the herd. That's the whole point. Keeps you accountable to other people because you should not feel okay about doing things that hurt other people. I don't care if you want to go to the restaurant. I don't care if you want to go to Taylor Swift's Eras tour. Go see Beyonce Renaissance. I don't care. If you're gonna go out and do that, and then the next day, go to the grocery store talking about, well, I'm always gonna test and mask before I go around disabled people. Okay, so do you do that every time before you leave the house? Because it's disabled people everywhere that you don't know. Again, whose lives you're directly impacting. You feeling okay about harming people is not more important. Hello? It's like, yes, it's nuance, but not really. I don't know. I don't know. You gotta, like, you do have to think about it. Sometimes you gotta be strict because it's life or death. I remember my dad at it was either Thanksgiving or Christmas a couple of years ago while my mom was going through chemo treatments, talking to my aunt about like, hey, yeah, I think I might have talked about this already, but was telling her like, I know that you have a life to live, but we see you being out and about and get nervous about having you over knowing that my mom is having chemo. Her immune system is compromised. So bringing home anything, a cold, let alone COVID, a fungus, a rash, like I remember we had to keep the dogs clean. You have to keep food clean. Like you have to take extra care when people are in compromised situations. And I think this goes back to what we were saying about basically like sometimes you got to conform to the people around you. Like, yeah, sometimes we have to burden each other because being alive is a burden. It's fine. It's not a dirty word. Like we need to get over that shit. I don't want to burden other people with my needs. Well, are you not burdened by your own needs? I'm burdened every day by having to take care of myself. It sucks, but I have to do it because what did we say? Being an adult means you got to do some shit you don't want to do. Being burdened by your children, your pets, your family members, whoever it is, like to give a shit about people is a burden, but the gift that you get is that they are alive. Like what? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Yes, the agency and accountability we must take. That's part of our adulting. Even under oppression, we still have our agency and accountability. We do. We do. Basically, do you want liberation or do you want to just be comfortable enough? This is the question. This is the question. And like when I say this is the question, this is not me posturing or moralizing either, virtually signaling whatever. It's like really think about it. Really think about it. The ways that bye, Elizabeth. It was good to see you. Really think about the sacrifices you would have to make in order to truly embody your to truly embody your convictions in your politics. Like, what would you really have to do? And this is hard because so many of us have been conditioned to be more individualistic and more materialistic. Like, we've been conditioned to get joy and pleasure out of inconsequential things, basically, out of just like random shit. Like, we have to be honest about that. We have to be honest about the not even to use this word, but like the privilege of living in the imperial core, as they say, like living in the most quote powerful, biggest fucking bullies of the world country where we don't have to think about how our consumption affects other people, but it does. Um and it affects other people around the world, but it also affects people like right here with us. And it's very easy to like slip into that mindset that says, I don't need to worry about what's going on with other people because other people's problems are their problems. But it's like, I don't know. I don't know. It's not that simple. I do think there are times, and then maybe this is being another complicated layer of it. There are times where you are in situations or relationships that are actually draining the life and resource out of you, and you don't necessarily need to stay in that, you know. But there's a sacrifice that comes with that, because a lot of times you wouldn't stay in uncomfortable relationships if there wasn't something that you were getting or needed in whatever convoluted way out of that relationship, you know? Like, that's oftentimes why it's hard to leave abusive relationships, because that there's something about it that you can't just easily separate from, and it sucks. It's difficult. Um so I don't know. This shit gets complicated, but this is why I say, like, the whole project manager analogy of, like, you really got to think about what the goal is, what the desire is, what your purpose is, or your value, or whatever it is. And if you were to construct your life around that value, what would you do? How would you set your life up? How would you make your decisions? And you also have to accept that sometimes you're going to get it wrong. Sometimes you're going to mess up. Sometimes you're going to go against your own values, because to be human is to contradict yourself. And that sucks too. But again, with power comes responsibility, right? Choices have consequences. And also, people make up systems, and systems uphold the violence. Wait, people make up systems and uphold the violence that these systems perpetuate. The amount of people using the blame it on the systems, not individuals, to not mask, make it seem like it can't be both. Yes, exactly. Because it takes individuals to make up a system. It takes individuals to make up a team. That was the other thing too. I played a lot of team sports. So, the way that you behave, like, even though you lose as a team, one person can definitely, like, do too much in a way that causes the team to lose. That's absolutely possible. If I'm playing basketball with four other people on my team against five people on another team, and I decide that every single possession I'm going to run down the court and jack up a three and brick every single one of them, and then the other team constantly gets the rebound and goes and scores on the other side, and we never score because I've never passed the ball to my other teammates, I cost us that game. We lost as a team, yeah. But I don't really know. Like, the best anybody else could have done was maybe get more offensive boards or something. But I'm not exactly helping my team out by being a ball hog. You know, same thing with quarterbacks in football. It's like, the play starts. Really, the play starts with the snap, but then the play starts with the quarterback. Quarterback has to catch a snap, make the correct pass, and then it's on the teammate to catch it, and whatever happens after that happens. But, individuals make up teams, individuals make up systems. Like, yes, but you can't use you can't use the system as a way to evade accountability for your individual actions. Yes, you are doing what you need to do to survive, and also, how are your decisions influencing your relationships? Like, are you really prioritizing relationships, or are you just trying to get that bag? And it's complicated. Like I said, sometimes you need to get that bag because it's life or death. But also, what would it be like to be in a situation where you actually could depend on your relationships and not have to sacrifice yourself to being a wage slave to capitalism, I don't know. Things that I think about. I think that was everything I needed to cover today. It's uncomfortable, but I think it's time that we accept and get very real about the discomfort that is coming. and prepare. I don't know how to do that. I wish I did. I'm listening and learning. I'm wrestling in my own mind with how I need to position myself because I know being here is not safe, even for me. But building relationships is scary, especially when you've been hurt. Building trust is scary, especially whenever you've been lied to and deceived and manipulated, you know? Like, relationships are scary, but we're all we got. Isn't that what they said? Wasn't that the title of that podcast? Um, where is it? Yeah. We all we got. Ah! Ah! Oh, yeah, I didn't even see this earlier. Your partner is having their Venus return while you're having your Mars return. Well, if y'all need a Sidistry reading, hit me up. Shoot me an email. Let's talk about it. Okay. I appreciate it so much. You bring the conversation as half the battle when it comes to prepping. Thank you. Thank you for that. Quick question. I came in late, so could you give a quick summary of what the thick of it is we're about to be in? Oh, that's so funny. I didn't even really talk about that. The thick of it is basically the opposition, and I will save this if you want to go back and watch it, but for anybody else who maybe missed the beginning, this week Mars stations retrograde. We have the second Jupiter Mercury opposition, but basically Venus entering Capricorn and making this opposition with Mars basically all month it just feels like a really significant transit because the Mars Venus opposition between Cancer and Capricorn is responsible for the Jupiter Mercury opposition. So the thick of it is basically like these two opposing planets, these opposing tools, in different modalities, like trying to find some kind of balance between these two things and all of the reasons why that might be difficult to do right now. Because pretty soon, like right now, the sun is ruled by Mars, but the sun will be ruled by Jupiter by the middle of the month as well. So it's going to tip into Jupiter's favor soon, which is interesting. So we'll talk about that when that gets here. But yeah, there's basically a lot of astrology this week. And I listed it all at the beginning. I'm not going to list it again because now I need to go. But yeah, check out, if you have the iCals, check out your iCals. I think Sidereal Maven also posted December's transits on her Patreon. And yeah, it's all listed at the beginning of this video if you want to watch it again. So that's the thick of it. Okay. I need to go put on some pants and go to work. I hope you all had a wonderful break. Please like the video if you haven't liked it already. If you didn't have a break, I hope you get one soon. Thank you so much for being here today, for listening, for letting me talk through these really difficult, touchy subjects. I will see you all again next week. And hopefully, if I get some time, I'll see y'all again later this week. I keep saying I'm going to do a live on a Thursday or a Friday, and then I just be tired. But, maybe one day I won't be tired. So I'll talk to y'all again very soon. Thanks for listening. Bye. Cue outro. Music.